All right. Let's do this. Let's do this. All-time channel rant coming. You know, this is going to be black for a funeral. No shit. This is going to be anywhere from half an hour to an hour, I don't know, of me just venting. If that does not intrigue you, then so be it. But at least know that that's what it's going to be. And obviously, the vast majority of this, your rant after the Islanders lost hit an hour. It was 2 years ago. Yeah, this is just going to be me just to be done with it. Now, if you're expecting the, like, I'm going to sit here and just yell and scream and cry, that's not going to be it. And I feel like most people who, and shout out to these people, I love these people who watch and or listen to the Tukey's Take podcast, available wherever podcasts can be heard, and of course in video form on YouTube. Search Tukey's Take podcast. All season long, Sin and I, Endo and I, we have been talking about the Bruins and this historic run. And so often with our viewer question segment, it'd be like, oh man, so what do you think about the Bruins? Like, are you hyped about the Bruins? And it's like, no, not necessarily, right? Because it doesn't matter until you get to the playoffs. I said that all year long. I said that right before the playoffs started. I said that while the playoffs were beginning. I said it throughout the series. That you just simply can't kind of rest on your laurels and expect things to go your way based off of a regular season. This is not the Premier League. The President's Trophy really doesn't mean shit. If anything, you could argue it's an outright detriment. So heading into this, I'm not going to lie and say during Game 7, which I'm sorry I didn't live stream it. Again, I got home late. I had to watch the first period on my phone anyway. And there will be numerous points where I'm sure I lose my train of thought because there's so much on my mind right now. But in talking about this Bruins season, I could not fully enjoy that run of the best regular season of all time because you know what is ahead, you know what's at stake. And I'll stop talking about the Bruins there for a second because I want to, first and foremost, before I say anything else about the Boston Bruins, the Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers. Now, I will say Matthew Tkachuk's Game 7 post-game interview of like, no one believed we could do this. That's obviously bullshit and, you know, exaggerating. But if that is what they had to say to themselves in the locker room for motivation, well, fucking hell, didn't it work? You know, to say nobody gave them a shot was ridiculous. It's the Stanley Cup playoffs. Anything can happen. I think maybe no one would have given them a shot had the Tampa-Columbus series not happened 4 years ago. But it was a phenomenal series for the Panthers. And it does, and thank you guys for the resubs, by the way. I appreciate you. It does lend credence to the idea that the President's Trophy curse exists for a reason because you're guaranteed to play a lower seed that probably had to scratch and crawl their way into the playoffs in the first place. And it's very clear for the Florida Panthers, while yes, they won in round 1 last year, and that was their first series win in like 25 years, they collapsed against Tampa last year in round 2. They got swept. That pressure likely got to them. This year, it is so clear that this Panthers team, especially after the Tkachuk trade, thrived, just absolutely thrived out, you know, off of being underdogs instead of being favorites. It just fit them that much better. Now, don't get me wrong. I still say the Florida Panthers never should have been in a position where they had to scratch and crawl just to get ahead of Buffalo to make the playoffs. It never should have been that bad for them, or to have to rely on the Pittsburgh Penguins to absolutely fucking choke, which the Penguins did. But once the Panthers got there, all they could do was play their game. Buffalo disrespect. I mean, hey, Sabres are good, but they're not make the playoffs over the Florida Panthers good, at least on paper. Again, for Florida, you can see the weak points. Sergei Bobrovsky, Alex Lyon, their goaltending was not phenomenal. Defensively, they still have some question marks that you'd like to think a team like Toronto might do very, very well against, but you never know. The bottom line is, too, people are like, Barkov was quiet. I mean, he had 5 points in the first 6 games. Verhaeghe was a point per game throughout the entire series. Matthew Tkachuk was phenomenal. The Florida Panthers are just one of those teams with the makeup of them, especially after the Tkachuk trade heading into this year, that it's one of those clubs that once they get to the playoffs, who knows what they're going to be able to do. That was my standpoint heading into the series, and well, shit, look at this. They fucking went and did it. I'm not going to be that type of fan. It's like, they're dirty. Every fucking team's dirty. It's the playoffs. Referees don't call shit, so every team's dirty. The refs suck. The refs do suck, but they suck for everybody. David Pasternak embellished to get a call tonight. The refs also missed 2 too many men penalties on the Panthers in the first period. Every team in the playoffs is dirty. The refs suck in every series and calls go. It's not that. Like, the Panthers fucking earned it, man. And in that next round, and of course we will talk about it on the podcast as we always do, in that next round, once we get to talking about Leafs and Panthers in round 2, I'm not going to say like, I think this team's going to win, that going to win. We'll go on the record on the show. I'm sure we'll have one out Monday night. Although we might wait until Tuesday, because that way we'd know the result of Game 7, Devils-Rangers. We'll see. I got to talk to them about that. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not rooting against Florida moving forward. I'm not rooting against the Leafs either. I'm just going to be able to sit back and watch a great series. And honestly, bit of a soft spot for both sides. Whoever wins and goes to the conference finals, yeah, I won't be upset to see that. I mean, again, for Leafs fans, Saturday night was amazing. And tonight for the Panthers, I mean, this is outside of the Stanley Cup appearance in 96. This is the biggest night, the biggest series win in Panthers franchise history. It's tough to hate it. And again, it's one of those things too, where, hey, that friendship might have fallen apart, but my prior co-host on the podcast was the biggest Florida Panthers fan I know. And even though we don't call ourselves friends anymore, I'm still very happy for that guy, because he was a fucking diehard and is a diehard Panthers fan. And it's really fucking cool to see the Panthers do this. It was really fucking cool. They're 3 games at home. That place is fucking packed. Again, all this, I would really hope that finally the bullshit about, the Florida Panthers moved the Florida Panthers. Can we fucking stop with that? I know most people are focusing on the Coyotes with that now, but Jesus Christ. It's like everywhere else. If you have a good team, people show up. It's pretty simple. So I just wanted to say that about the Florida Panthers first, because obviously a lot of this is going to be about the Boston Bruins, right? So I talked about the regular season, best, regular season of all time. Tyler, I see you there. Best regular season of all time for the Bruins. A lot of the keys to success for the Bruins in the regular season was, 1, the team staying relatively healthy and having the depth to continue on. Another key aspect, if not the most important aspect to their success of the season, was the willingness to rotate goaltenders. The willingness to rotate goaltenders. And that is something that's going to come up a decent amount for me talking about this season, this series, so on and so forth, because flashback to game number 1. Bruins won that game 3-1. All things considered, hey, not that bad. 3-1 win in game one. You're feeling good. You're feeling great at that point. Alex Lyon had a decent game. I think that was the game where Trent Frederick got denied on 2 cross creases. I mean, that could have been a blowout in favor of the Bruins. But then game 2 happened. And people have probably heard me talk about this a lot, especially on the podcast, which I'm going to keep plugging. The Bruins have had some interesting struggles when it comes to playing in crucial games on home ice in the playoffs. And for me, it dates back to 2013. Stanley Cup final against Chicago, game 6 on home ice. They are up 3-2 in the closing moments. Doesn't that sound familiar? They're up 3-2 in the closing moments and lose that game, if I'm not mistaken, 4-3. The 2 quick goals, 17 seconds, and GG's. Regardless, that series ended in 6. Since then, the next year, the Bruins lost in 7 to Montreal. If I'm not mistaken, that was on home ice. There was the Senators loss in 2017, the Tampa loss in 2017-18, which was fucking brutal. And then they made it back to the Stanley Cup final in 2019, didn't they? And they had game 7 against St. Louis in their home building. And they lost. They blew it. They did not show up for that game 7 against St. Louis. They were down 1-0 relatively early on. A late goal for Alex Pietrangelo at the end of the first period. The Marchand line change. There you go, Sergachev. You knew what was coming. And they ended up losing that game 4-1. They didn't score until the third period. They just did not show up. And if they weren't already kind of tilted for whatever reason, because you think about the roster turnover from 2013 to 2019, they were still kind of tilted in their ability to not show up on home ice when the pressure was on. Kind of Leafs-esque before this series, dare I say. We'll talk about that in a second. 1920, they lost to the Lightning in fucking 5 again, and then the Islanders in 6, and then last year they lost to the Hurricanes in 7. And now this year, greatest regular season of all time. They go up against the Florida Panthers. Again, respect to Matthew Tkachuk. I get the self-motivation deal. It was never a dead set. Like, yep, that's it. The Bruins got this. No problem. Anyone who said that was a fucking idiot. It was one thing to favor the Bruins. It was another thing to say Bruins in 3. It's the fucking playoffs. You never do that. They lost game 2 on April 19th, 6-3 in their own building. And at that point, you start to say, oh shit, this might be a series. And then they win game 3, 4-2. They win game 4, 6-2 in Florida. A 3-1 series lead. What must hurt is most Bruins fans wanted the Panthers. I would have preferred the Panthers over the Islanders, yeah. I 100% said that for the goaltending. Fun. So the Bruins are up 3-1 after game 4. And all of a sudden, game 2 was really highlighted by a lot of shit turnovers. That was the game where Dmitry Orlov just kind of from the half wall threw it in front. Matthew Tkachuk fucking scored. Game 5 was abysmal from the Bruins' perspective. And of course, game 5 ends with Linus Ullmark trying to play the puck behind his own goal. He has 2 people this way, nobody this way, so he goes that way. Brutal. You lose that first opportunity to close out the series, and it was very kind of similar to that Leafs-Lightning series where a lot of Leafs fans were saying Leafs in 6, Lightning in 7. That was my standpoint. Bruins in 6, Panthers in 7. And a lot of people are like, come on, the Bruins are going to get this. But again, Bruins, home ice, game 7, lot of pressure of best regular season of all time. You got to keep that going. I just kind of knew, history's not on their side. And then you get to game 6. And that game was an absolute shit show. Where, for those who do not recall game 6 from, when was that? It was 2 nights ago. That was on Friday. Panthers score 2 minutes in. Bruins tie it. Panthers score. Bruins tie it. Panthers score. Bruins score. And then the Bruins are up 4-3. Oh my God. And then the Panthers score. And then the Bruins score. And then the Panthers score. And then the Panthers score. And then the Panthers score again. That is not the type of performance that we had seen all regular season long. It simply wasn't. To the point by the end of this series, I mean, the Bruins only lost 7 times on home ice all regular season long. They lost 3 times on home ice to the Panthers. I think the Panthers, if you count regular season and playoffs, account for 28%, almost 29% of the Bruins' losses this year. So, fuck. The point of going back through all of these games and then talking about Game 7 is to just show that once they were up 3-1, somehow, some way, they kind of lacked that killer instinct to close out the series. People are making the jokes about, oh, here's a hand with the Leafs logo passing the baton to the Bruins. But yeah, that's basically what happened. Like, if this was a Leafs collapse, the memes would be as, if not even more outrageous than they already are now. And it's deserved. Like, I wanted to start off by saying that the Panthers earned this, and they did, as much as the Bruins blew it. Because the Panthers still had to show up and make the Bruins pay for their mistakes, and they did. Whereas the Bruins, I fucking said it during Game 7 on Twitter, have shot themselves in the foot so many times. Their collective foot, if there was one foot to represent every foot on the Boston Bruins, it would look like a piece of fucking Swiss cheese. They have just consistently throughout that series shot themselves in the foot over and over with brutal turnovers. And Game 7 was really, really no different. I can't count the amount of times they turn the puck over in their own zone. I don't want to get into talking about individual players yet. Hampus Lindholm turned back into a pumpkin. Last year, I said I didn't think the Hampus Lindholm trade deadline acquisition was good, for the sole reason that the Bruins had defensive depth. They needed more scoring. I was in favor of them getting Max Domi. They did not. Max Domi ended their season last year for Carolina. And this year in the regular season, Hampus Lindholm's playing out of his fucking mind. Like, he won't go down as a Norris favorite. He was stellar in the regular season. He was not that. He was not that, especially Game 6 and 7. Those are the 2 worst games I've seen him play in a Bruins uniform. Those might have been the 2 worst games in his NHL career. He was that bad. And guess what? Domi's in round 2. There you go. Not to say if the Bruins had Max Domi this year, they would have won. Not to say that, obviously. So Game 7 tonight. Again, in Boston, as you guys all know, home rink. A lot of people are like, oh, at least it's at home. At least it's at home. And again, my viewpoint of, well, no, that's not inherently a positive. Davos, hello, safe flight, my friend. Again, I didn't inherently view that as a positive, and I certainly didn't when Brandon Montour scored the opening goal of the game. Was it a weak goal allowed by Swayman? Yes. And that'll bring me to talking about the goaltenders. All season long, like I mentioned, they had rotated goaltenders out to keep the 2 fresh for the season. And it worked out perfectly. You simply do not have the success that they did without that goaltending setup of 49 games for Allmark, 37 for Swayman. You simply don't. Throughout the series, Linus Allmark was not himself. There's a lot of talk about him not being 100%. I haven't seen that confirmed. I know Bergeron talked about his injury. I'll get to that. Don't worry. But until we know for sure what the problem was with Linus Allmark, I mean, yeah, a lot of people are saying he was probably injured. He had the horrific gaffe in Game 5 at home to literally hand the Panthers an overtime win. But in a general sense, he was not himself. An .896 save percentage in 6 appearances for Linus Ullmark. Ullmark should not... I wouldn't say should not have been the starter for Game 3, because the Bruins did win that game after the loss in Game 2. I wouldn't even inherently say he shouldn't have started Game 6 after his mistake in overtime for Game 5. But during Game 6, the 7-5 final for the Panthers on home ice, Jeremy Swayman should have been brought back in. And again, people will be like, oh, that's hindsight. You got to trust Jim Montgomery on that. And you can't take out, like, okay, the Bobrovsky's struggling too. If you take out Ullmark, what are the optics of that? And how does that inspire Florida? The bottom line is Jeremy Swayman should have come on in relief for Linus Ullmark in Game 6, especially if there was a good chance of you starting him in Game 7, because that little bit of extra game time for Swayman would have benefited him greatly. I don't know if that first Montour goal goes in on Swayman had he been a little bit more locked into the series. And any Bruins fan blaming Linus Ullmark, and I've said this to death, Bruins fans fucking love to blame goaltenders. Tim Thomas is our greatest gift and our greatest curse. As a gift, the 2011 Cup Final, because he took a team that perennially fucking chokes and he won. But that set the bar so high that even Vezina Trophy winning best goaltender in franchise history, Tuukka Rask, was treated like a piece of shit by a large majority of the fan base, to the point that during the bubble playoffs, he went home because his daughter was sick and people criticized him for it. Yeah, those are the shit Bruins fans you can critique all day long. I ain't going to defend those guys. Holy fuck. It set the bar so high that, you know, it just makes it so difficult. And I get, like I said, the optics of Ullmark, whatever. Swayman in Game 7, he didn't get the win. Jeremy Swayman was not at fault for the Game 7 loss. Jeremy Swayman played fucking great tonight, and the team in front of him let him down tremendously. Need we forget the start of overtime, was it not? Matthew Tkachuk was stopped on a fucking breakaway. Like, are we going to forget about that already because he allowed a goal while screened? No. Anyway, second period. Panthers scored again. Sam Reinhart. I turned the fucking game off at that point. Call me an asshole. Call me a fake fan. But up to that point where Sam Reinhart made it 2-0 early in the second period, this team did not show up at all. It was the flattest start I can recall from the Bruins. They were not shooting the fucking puck. I can't even explain the idea of the style they were trying to play, of everything has to be perfect, overly passing. I just genuinely don't understand it. They started to figure it out eventually, and surprise, surprise, it worked. David Krejci scored on a power play. I didn't see the goal. I had to look up the highlight on Twitter. Tyler Bertuzzi tied it 55 seconds into the third. Didn't see the goal. Shout out to Sim for the Win. Sim for the Win Productions on YouTube. And a Tukey's Take podcast co-host who was texting me what was happening. I didn't see the David Pastrnak goal. I missed that too. But I did turn the game back on shortly after the Brandon Montour goal. So that was great. The Boston Bruins. So it's my fault. No, it's not. I stopped watching. I stayed strong and did not turn that game back on. And it didn't matter. Brandon Montour scored with 59 seconds left. The Bruins had a 3-1 lead in the series. They had a 3-2 lead in the game, minute to go, and they couldn't hold on as Montour scores again. What a fucking series for Brandon Montour, by the way. Jesus Christ. And then in overtime, the Bruins for 8.5 minutes had their fucking show run. The Panthers dominated that overtime. 100% dominated that overtime. And at the end, behind their own goal, Matthew Tkachuk outworks everybody because it's Matthew Tkachuk. For Hagee on the half wall, Tkachuk does a quick cut in front, Nobody picks him up. Swayman screened. Bam. Top shelf. Carter Verhaeghe ends the series. Surprise, surprise. Leaving Carter Verhaeghe a chance to pick a corner is a bad decision after he scored 40 goals this year. Who'd have thought? Panthers, like I said, fucking earned it. There's no, and I said it a couple minutes ago, I'll say it again, there's no, oh, the refs, oh, the Panthers are dirty. Again, everyone's dirty. The ref sucks for everyone. The Panthers were phenomenal, man. They were phenomenal. And the Bruins fucking blew it. And that's kind of been where my headspace is at since this game ended. It's just, where does this rank amongst greatest collapses of all time? And obviously, in the moment, you're going to lean more towards saying this is the greatest collapse of all time. Recency bias does exist. But I do genuinely think this is the greatest collapse of a generation, certainly of my lifetime. And oh man, Colorado just tied it. That's a shame. I have seen the Bruins have a 3-0 series lead on the Philadelphia Flyers back in 2010. Not only a 3-0 series lead, but also a lead in which, if I'm not mistaken, Flyers fans will correct me, the Bruins had a 3-0 lead in that game. I have seen 17 seconds happen. Again, Bruins-Hawks Stanley Cup final. Bruins 2 minutes away from forcing Game 7 in Chicago. Chicago raises the cup at TD Garden. I have seen the Bruins make it to Game 7 against the St. Louis Blues and not show up. To me, Patriots are 17-0, Reds. To me, this is the greatest collapse that I can remember. And yes, I am factoring in Tampa and Columbus. And the reason why I view this as a bigger collapse than that is not because the Bruins are my favorite team. It's because I do genuinely think this was a greater collapse. The Tampa Bay Lightning had done basically what the Bruins had done in the regular season. They showed up for 2 periods of that series. They basically didn't even show up. They did the Abe Simpson. Walk in, take your hat off, circle back, grab your hat, and leave. That's what Tampa did. They never showed up outside of that lead in Game 1. They never showed up. It's more shocking that it was a sweep. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of a collapse, this was a bigger collapse. Greatest regular season team of all time. 3-1 lead in the series. 3-2 lead with a minute to go in Game 7 on your home ice. And you lost in overtime. This is, for my money, the greatest collapse in hockey history. And it's certainly up there. I mean, I'm not going to go like sports history, because Jesus Christ, someone will be like, oh, you know, back in the World Cricket Final in the 70s. Like, I don't give a fuck. I'm glad you do. It's just one of those things where at the end of the day, I view this as the biggest collapse of all time. And there might be some other things. I mean, again, the Falcons are definitely up there. That's why I'm not going to sit there and say it's the biggest choke in history. In terms of Boston sports history, it might also be the biggest collapse of all time, because the first Giants loss wasn't a collapse. The second Giants Super Bowl loss wasn't a collapse. At the end of the day, I've seen people ask, like, hey, what loss hurts more? I mean, the answer is tough. I mean, yeah, the Patriots had a chance at an undefeated season, so that sucks. The Bruins have lost 2 cup finals since winning in 2011. Where does this rank in terms of hurt? I mean, the Patriots also lost to the Eagles in the Super Bowl not all that long ago. I don't know where I'd have this rank in terms of the most painful losses I've seen as a Boston sports fan. At the same time, no one's going to expect or have any sympathy for the most part. They might be like, Toogie, I'm sad you're bummed. I'm glad the Bruins lost, though, because obviously people are tired of seeing Boston sports teams win stuff, and I get that, and I totally understand. In terms of what happens next, because that's the biggest thing right now, what happens next for the Bruins? Warrior, thank you for the gifted. And to be honest, I don't know what happens next. Like I said, I know the Florida Panthers are going to move on to play Toronto. I'm looking forward to that series. It's not like I'm going to stop watching the playoffs because, hey, that's going to be a really, really fucking fun series to watch. But yeah, in terms of what happens next for the Bruins, I don't know. And obviously, the biggest question mark right now is surrounding Patrice Bergeron. And knowing that there's a chance that we just witnessed the last game of Patrice Bergeron's career. And that hurts worse than the loss, let me tell you. He mentioned after the game that he was playing with a herniated disc in his back. That's why he missed the start of the series. And of course, Bergeron decided to play through that. The guy played with a fucking hole in his lung in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Patrice Bergeron, people can disagree if they want. I don't give a shit about anyone else's opinion on this. So disagree. Just know I could not care less about any words that might be typed. Patrice Bergeron is the greatest two-way forward in the history of the NHL. He is the greatest Boston Bruin of all time. He is a future Hockey Hall of Famer. The Selke Award should be renamed in his honor because he has been hockey excellence for nearly 20 years now at the NHL level. You disagree with that? I think you're an idiot, but you're entitled to that opinion. That's okay. You are allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to call me a homer if you want. You look foolish in doing so. Patrice Bergeron might be done. And that's the unfortunate thing. We do not know. He commented, like, he saluted the fans afterwards. He commented on it like, I was just saluting the fans for the season. But he did say he's going to think about what happens next. And, the bottom line is the Bruins do not have this season unless Patrice Bergeron comes back. And there was a lot of talk last offseason. Is he going to even come back? Is he going to retire? Is he going to go to Montreal to play one season before retiring? That injury, for all we know, and I don't say that as like a postulating, but the word was he got injured in Game 82 in Montreal because he wanted to play with his dad in the building because his dad allegedly is under poor health. And of course, a lot of people too were like, how dare Bergeron play? How dare Bergeron play? No, like, again, some things are more important than winning. And look, if the Bruins Cup was lost because Patrice Bergeron elected to have a moment with his family and coincidentally picked up an injury, well then fuck it, so be it. It is what it is. Bergeron being roughed up isn't the reason they lost the series. It contributed, but at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. The guy's 37 years old. His birthday, I think, is in the summer. So we'll see what happens. It's the rest of the team as well that is kind of a big question mark. Obviously, people are memeing Brad Marchand to death, and I mean, hey, the guy's earned it. It is what it is. But Brad Marchand's 34 years old, and I said as much on Twitter. And sure, my opinion will change. If Patrice Bergeron retires, in a sense, would I be all right with them kind of leaning more towards a rebuild in a sense? A rebuild on the fly? Yeah. Yeah, I would. Because their core is a hell of a lot older than, say, Tampa's. When Tampa lost in 2019, everyone was saying, oh, they got to blow it up, they got to blow it up. And Tampa rightfully stuck by it and said, no, we know we have the right core for it. At the same time, that kind of decision was made easier by the fact that Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov, Victor Hedman were not already in their mid-30s. Whereas for the Bruins, again, Brad Marchand's still on a great deal for 2 more years, but Bergeron, if he's gone, if Krejci's gone, then where do you go from there, right? Where do you go from there? Tyler Bertuzzi was phenomenal. He was. Tyler Bertuzzi was fucking phenomenal. Can you afford to bring him back? Because as a kind of afterthought deadline pickup compared to the other moves that they made, he was outstanding. But they only had to pay him about $3.4 million against the cap. Tyler Bertuzzi can get a hell of a lot more money. Can get a hell of a lot more money on the open market. I don't really see how the Bruins keep Tyler Bertuzzi. I don't. Pavel Zacha was a big surprise this season. He still signed. He signed a new deal, so he's not going anywhere. I'm good with that. David Pastrnak heated up, but maybe a little bit too late. I mean, again, he just signed his brand new deal. In terms of my frustration, like, fuck it, rebuild, because guess what? The majority of the team is going to be viewed as chokers, and they are. I mean, David Pasternak's going nowhere. But that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. Do I really want Bertuzzi back for the master plan draw pass turnover? Everyone was making passes like that, though, for the Bruins, especially in Game 7. Everyone was trying to be way too fancy because they simply didn't have the fucking energy level. They didn't. Either they didn't have the energy level or they were lazy. It's one of the two. But at the end of the day, so many people were making those overly fancy passes for no reason whatsoever. And really, they weren't willing to kind of duel in the corners as much as the Panthers were. So I don't blame Bertuzzi. I mean, God, if you blame someone for a mistake, you're blaming that entire fucking team. Because there aren't too many people that played well. Taylor Hall notwithstanding. Charlie Coyle played pretty well defensively. His offense didn't show up. There's already people saying trade Jake DeBrusk. I disagree with it. I thought he was good. It gets down to, honestly, maybe the biggest elephant in the room. And like I said, this is now kind of the part where I maybe get a little bit scatterbrained because there's so many different aspects to talk about. One of the biggest aspects, and it was already mentioned in chat, did Paul Maurice outcoach Jim Montgomery? 1,000% he did. He did. Jim Montgomery, unfortunately, he was and will win Coach of the Year, and rightfully so. He was on point in the regular season. He didn't get it done. He didn't get it done in the playoffs. He zigged when he should have zagged. And it's easy. It's easy to say that with hindsight because they lost, but anybody paying attention would have seen Bruins fans kind of calling out some of these decisions. You know, Trent Frederick was back in the lineup for Game 7, but he only played 5 of the 7 games. A lot of people were upset about that. I don't know how I felt about that personally, because the guy was fucking snake bitten in terms of not scoring. You know, I mentioned Game 1 a little bit earlier. There was the decision to stick with Derek Forbort for quite a bit. I mean, he played all 7 games, whereas Matt Grzelcyk and Connor Clifton split time in this series. Grzelcyk playing 4 out of the 7 and probably should have played the entirety of the 7. We already talked about the goaltending and the fact that Jeremy Swayman should have appeared in Game 6. Yeah, unfortunately, Jim Montgomery was bested by Paul Maurice. And I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a thing that you hang your head in shame about. Paul Maurice is a phenomenal fucking coach. He is. I mean, Paul Maurice has been in the NHL since 1995. A lot of people commenting in this chat, or that might view this, because I'll throw this up on YouTube later, were not born by the time he was already in the NHL at age 28. I was a year old. You know? There are people who were watching this that may have been born 10 years after Paul Maurice debuted as a coach in the NHL, because he was an assistant coach and then a head coach with the Hartford Whalers in 1995. You know? It's just one of those things where he's been around for a long time for a reason. And, you know, in a lot of ways, because there were Panthers fans talking about this, was it a mistake to bring in Paul Maurice instead of keeping Andrew Brunette? Because, again, for those who might have forgotten, last year, start of the year, Joel Quenneville was the head coach of the Florida Panthers. And then he wasn't. And Andrew Brunette, former NHLer, kind of took the reins as head coach. They got past the first round for the first time since 96. But then they got clowned by Tampa in round 2 last year. And that lost Andrew Brunette his job. And there were a lot of people saying, well, here are the faults with Paul Maurice. This is why the Panthers should have kept him. But at the same time, yeah, noted not cool guy Joel Quenneville. At the same time, I think Paul Maurice, in terms of what he brings to a team as a head coach, was on full display in this series. LOL Winnipeg, getting rid of him. In fairness, they brought on an also great head coach in Rick Bowness. And yeah, hey, turns out we know the Jets' problems aren't with the coaching staff. I look forward to that full rebuild. Except for, if you want to finally give Kyle Connor to the Bruins, that'd be fucking great. Thank you. Yeah, Paul Maurice is amazing. Jim Montgomery was outcoached. Again, he made the wrong choices at the wrong time. And just to continue going through that Bruins lineup, Tomas Nosek, I mean, look, you can't say that the Bruins lost the series because of Tomas Nosek. Like, he's a defensive zone and PK specialist. Garnet Hathaway, however, I'm a little bit disappointed, I gotta be honest. I was very pumped when the Bruins got Garnet Hathaway in the same deal that they got Dmitry Orlov. Yeah, Hathaway, fuck. You know, for as much as it was like, oh, do you have Foligno or Frederick in the lineup? Do you have Lauko or Frederick in the lineup? Garnet Hathaway probably should not have been in tonight. It probably still should have been Foligno or Lauko. Honestly, say what you want about Frederick. My preferred fourth line tonight would have been Lauko, Nosek, Foligno. But that is what it is. And then defensively, maybe even Greer. I would have loved it for AJ, who, again, somewhat friend of the channel. Defensively, Orlov was so fucking hit or miss. Oh, he was so hit or miss in this series. He had the horrific turnover in game 1. He still had some of the rough moments, but then he'd turn it on and you'd see the Dmitry Orlov that was advertised. But his inconsistency in this series was rough, and I, again, don't really see how they bring him back. His cap hit was $1.3 million. That guy's making $5-6 million minimum on the open market. I don't see how they do it. Charlie McAvoy was also inconsistent, especially in Game 7. There's no other way to put it. He was inconsistent in that Game 7, and it was very disappointing. You know, it could still just be the sign of a younger defender, but there were some moments where I think maybe he lost. And again, whatever. This is just a fan fucking speculating. Don't put any stock into this. I don't know shit. But maybe, you know, for Charlie McAvoy, you look at his game tonight and it's like, well, Jesus, did you lose confidence in your teammates to put the effort in? So you were trying to put in extra effort to overcompensate and were making mistakes as a result? Because you're searching for any logical explanation of how this went so wrong for the Bruins. From a Bruins-centric point of view, we've already talked about what the Panthers did well. I talked about Hampus Lindholm. Fuck. Jekyll and Hyde turned back into a pumpkin. Was amazing in the regular season. You could take the duck out of Anaheim, but you can't take the Anaheim out of the Bruin, I guess, for lack of a better term, which was brutal. And again, shout out to the people that are going to hop in and be like, oh, you're crying. No, but again, these people obviously aren't listening. They just see, hey, Bruins fans talking. Fuck you! I would do it too. So, hey, it is what it is. Carlo was Carlo. He was at least consistent. And then, you know, Forbert, Grzelcyk, we already talked about that. I don't know what happens to that team next because so much of it hinges upon what happens with Bergeron, what happens with Krejci, the UFA situation as well. Are any of them willing to come back on a cheap deal? Because we've talked about it with Tampa. The Tampa Bay Lightning's key to success has been the ability to keep people for less money than they are worth. It obviously started with Stamkos, and when he elected to stay in Tampa for less money than he could have gotten elsewhere, Toronto included. Again, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov are both making under $10 million a year. Victor Hedman makes under $8 million. In the modern game, it takes that type of buy-in to see a team succeed. Or if you're in the case of Toronto and you did pay your stars that bit of extra, it does take a younger player on an ELC like Matthew Nyes stepping in and crushing it. It takes being able to acquire Ryan O'Reilly with 75% retained, so you're only paying him under $2 million. It takes that shrewdness, one way or another, the shrewdness to build a roster that way, or it takes buy-in from players to take less. And again, that was a big part of the Bruins' success this season, is that Bergeron and Krejci combined for $3.5 million in cap hit. This team does not do what they did and win the most games in regular season history without that level of buy-in, ultimately. So I look at like the entire picture right now. Again, no hard feelings for any Florida Panthers fans, man. I got nothing. There's no hate. There's no resentment. They won the series, and it's fucking sick for that organization that, again, for so long has been fucking dumped on by so many hockey fans, a lot of whom are now going, yeah, Florida, you beat Boston. Yes, I wanted you to move as of like 2 years ago, but yeah, Florida, you do you. I'm happy for Florida, man, because I've been there with Panthers fans. Had a podcast with the Panthers fan for a year. I was right there in the trenches of, can we give the Florida Panthers some fucking respect? I'm happy for the Panthers. I am. And like I said, them in Toronto, I'm all right with either team winning. I'm not rooting against either team. I'm not rooting against the Panthers because they beat the Bruins. I'm not rooting against the Leafs. Anyone who has ever watched what I do knows I have a soft spot for the Leafs. I've been a fan of Steve Dangle and a follower of all he's done for like 11, 12 years now. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I was in high school, and it's been a long time. Again, I'm just going to enjoy a really great series between those two teams. For the Bruins, I have no idea what happens next. It does go down as, frankly, a horrifically devastating loss that puts you in a situation where you do have that ultimatum. And the problem is, it's tough to have an opinion on those two directions they could go in said ultimatum. Run it back, maybe rebuild a little bit, because you don't have a full look at the picture right now, because you do not know the status of Patrice Bergeron, of David Krejci, and that's really going to dictate what the Bruins do moving forward. They will get clowned on relentlessly. There's a reason why I elected to have it be this screen tonight to see the chat, because I knew people would pop in here and just be like, fucking, they got fucked. Fuck the Bruins. The Bruins earned that. They earned that. You know, at the end of the day, it takes a special kind of fucking it up to win, 65 games in the regular season and not make it out of the first round. That is a special type of joke. So, look, in the past, this would have been a loss, I think, as a Bruins fan, that I would have looked at with just, so much dread and angst. But at the same time, I've already kind of come to terms with it, because the warning signs were there. I never allowed myself to get overly hyped because of the success of the regular season, because this was always a possibility. Tampa and Columbus showed us that 4 years ago. This was always a possibility. The NHL is a league of parity. It is. That's why we have so many series going 7. That's why there wasn't a single sweep in the first round. It's just one of those things where, I mean, the old phrase for football is any given Sunday, any given series, you never know what the fuck's going to happen. So many different X factors. So many different, and people will be like, oh, making excuses about the injuries. But it's true. Injuries affect every series. It's just how much is it affecting an individual team. Leafs fans know that. When John Tavares went down to injury, they still should have won that series. But hey, these fucking things happen. So in terms of like, oh, am I going to be upset to be like, oh, no, now I got to watch the Bruins get memed on for the rest of my life? No. Because I grew up watching them blow it outright. 2004, they fucking blew it. They never won anything with Joe Thornton. Then they blew it against fucking Montreal in 08. Notice the middle finger for that one. Carolina in 09. I mentioned the Philly collapse. They did win in 2011. And then what have they done repeatedly since 2011? They've fucking choked. Again, 2011 was the anomaly. And honestly, I mean, people, Scotty Walker, I so fucking hate him. It's just one of those things where people be like, oh yeah, whatever. But like genuinely, as a Bruins fan, I grew up hearing about all this team does is choke. Like, they won in 72. My dad was a child, and he's like, well, son, since then, they haven't done much. Oh, and there's the Patriots who haven't won shit. There's the Red Sox who haven't won shit. The Celtics haven't won since the 80s. Welcome to this life. And yes, in a lot of ways, it has changed. The Red Sox have won 4 fucking World Series. I've told that story a lot. My grandfather, God rest his soul, lived his entire goddamn life, never saw the Red Sox win anything. I've seen them win 4 times. The Celtics, I've seen them win in 08 and then lose in the finals. I have seen the Patriots win Super Bowl after Super Bowl and lose a couple in between. And yeah, those losses sucked. The Giants' undefeated run, still certainly the worst. It's just one of those things where these losses hurt, but at the same time, I have that perspective of like, well, Jesus, I've still seen all of my favorite teams win, including Liverpool, with the exception of the New England Revolution, who are in first place in MLS this year at the moment. We'll see if that continues. But yeah, I mean, hey, look, the loss hurts. The loss hurts a lot. Is it devastating for me? No. It might have been at a different time in my life. It's not devastating because while I still have the standpoint of they fucking blew it, and it sucks to have a 65-win season go up and smoke in the first round, but it was always a possibility. I never was one of those Bruins fans, and there are Bruins fans out there that had the mindset of like, oh, they're going to storm their way to the Cup. I still thought the Bruins would go on and win the Cup this year. I didn't think they'd storm their way to it, but I did think they had the chance to do it. I picked them in the prediction. My NHL 23 simulation, picked them. The EA simulation, picked them. A lot of fucking people picked the Boston Bruins to win the Stanley Cup. There's a reason for that, but it's also the playoffs. Anything can fucking happen. I'm still going to be a Bruins fan next year, the year after that, the year after that, so on and so forth. For now, does it fucking suck? Yes. Yes, it does. But it is what it is. My only hope now is that we haven't seen the last of Patrice Bergeron in the Bruins uniform, because that would suck. So I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. I'm going to leave it at that. For the sole purpose of, I feel like I'd be repeating myself at this stage. Again, Monday night / Tuesday morning, there will be a new episode of the two. Well, then again, keep an eye out on Twitter, because I have to ask Sin and Endo if we want to record on Monday or Tuesday, given Devils Rangers Game 7 on Monday. But it is just one of those things where, we have a podcast coming up we'll see how I feel the day after, maybe the day after the day after in terms of the Bruins. We'll see what new information we learn about the team in terms of injuries. And, who knows if someone's pretty much already decided that this was it for them. We'll see what happens. But yeah, end of the day, devastating loss. 65-win season up in smoke. But at the same time, I mean, you can only be so mad because, fuck, you look at it from the other side and the Florida Panthers, they fucking earned it. They fucking earned it. And again, I don't have, I'm not rooting for one side over the other. I like aspects about both teams. I look forward to seeing how the Leafs try to handle Matthew Tkachuk because I don't know if anybody can. What a fucking player. Then again, though, it's Alex Lyon or Sergei Bobrovsky in goal, so please don't let the Panthers get away with that again. Like I said, I'll leave it at that. I can't think of anything else without repeating myself. There will be things I think of later where I'm like, fuck, I should have mentioned that. But at the same time, Colorado and Seattle's going down to the wire, and I want to watch the rest of this like the rest of you. Oh, you know what I didn't mention? The Brad Marchand breakaway in Game 5 where the Bruins went on to lose in overtime. That fucking sucks. The hand pass rule. It's not the reason why the Bruins lost, but for the love of fuck, can we not have a fingertip be called a hand pass? Can we please rewrite that rule? Similar to how when Tuukka Rask against Tampa lost his skate blade and play doesn't stop. Can we maybe rewrite some rules here to be a little bit more specific? That would be great. And fuck. Yes. Fuck. Oh, and the last word in honor of Jerry Springer. The last word is this. Shoot the puck. Be nice to the guy in the stands that yells shoot, because sometimes they're right. And every single person at TD Garden that was yelling that to the Boston Bruins in Game 7, they were right. Fuck.